Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us today for our last day of Circa's Diversity Symposium. Today for our Lunch and Learn, we'll be focusing on building allyship into the workplace. And we're excited to have one of our new partners, Our Office, join us today. So I'm going to go over a couple housekeeping items, introduce our wonderful speakers for today, and then we'll get right into the content. So a little bit of Webinar 101, if you haven't joined a GoToWebinar in a while. That little orange rectangular button on the right-hand side of your panel, if it ever feels like it's in your way, you can feel free to minimize it. Also, all attendees, your phones and microphones are muted the whole time. So if you do have any questions, please put it in the right-hand side where it says questions. We will make sure that we have at the end for your questions, so make sure to insert them during the presentation and we can answer them at the end. A little bit about Circa and who we are. We have HRCI and SHRM accredited webinars like the one you're attending today. This webinar will be recorded and we will send out the recording and the certificates early next week for you. We also have Matters monthly publication and Ask the Experts forum with industry leaders. We are proud of ILG and AAED, and we sponsor and speak at OFCCP and diversity related conferences nationally and have a compliance and diversity Circa blog. Now I'm going to introduce our wonderful speakers for today. We have Sonia Safen. She started as a NASA engineer and astronaut wannabe, and is currently the CEO of Our Office, Inc., a category-defining leader in the emerging diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Our office pioneered diversity inclusion as a service for building inclusive workplace cultures on an affordable monthly subscription, and has been featured in the Mercer and Deloitte reports on DEI. Prior to Our Office, Sonia was a senior executive at Fortune 500 companies with significant global responsibilities. She has held numerous board seats and advisory roles at tech startups, investment funds, and nonprofits, and currently serves on the roles as tech startups, the role of board of directors of Cooper Standard, a publicly traded automotive company. Sonia has been recognized as a leader and an innovator throughout her career, most recently as Technologist of the Year by the Women of Color magazine, and as one of the most influential corporate directors by Women Inc. magazine. Sonia has a passion for mentoring entrepreneurs and aspiring professionals and is a private pilot and an avid explorer. Thank you so much for joining us, Sonia.
Thank you.
We also have us joining today Roselle Rogers, our Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Circa. Roselle is an accomplished HR executive with 30+ years of practical application. She joined Circa in 2006 and has been instrumental in the company's growth from local job board provider to the launch of its OFCCP compliance and diversity products. Roselle leads Circa's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy and thought leadership, as well as the company's OFCCP compliance and community partner relations. So our agenda for today, we are first going to focus on what is allyship. We'll then work our way to why allyship is important, and then focus on strategic leadership alignment, and then look at actions that you can take for cultivating allyship and engaging workplace allies for D&I, and then finalize our presentation with tools and resources to support allyship. I'm now going to hand it over to Roselle to kick start the presentation.
Thank you, Katie, and good afternoon, Sonia, and to everyone joining us today for this Lunch and Learn session on how we can build allyship in the workplace. So we'll begin our discussion on what allyship is in the first place. Allyship is the active practice of applying intentional and conscious efforts where you use your own voice, your privilege, your power, and the means you have to help, to advocate, to advance the inclusion of underrepresented or marginalized voices in the workplace. So while the term allyship was first coined in support of the LGBTQ movement in the past, and it has evolved to encompass support of all underrepresented groups, the concept of allyship really is not new. If you think of the Underground Railroad, that is a network of abolitionists who assisted the slaves to escape. Those were all allies, and they were all taking risks and leveraging their own resources to aid others to do what is right. So allyship is not a new concept at all. Allyship is using your own capital, using your own power, because we all have privilege and we all have influence, whether it is the color of our skin, our gender, or our influence by virtue of our position in the organization, right? To support and advocate for those who are underrepresented because they have been historically disadvantaged. And then bring those perspectives to the table and amplify those voices by lending your own voice to them, speaking their name when they aren't in the room, sponsoring their ideas or their candidacy for positions. So workplace allies essentially spend their own privilege and their own social capital for those underrepresented groups. And what are some examples that you can be an ally? Well, when you see someone being interrupted, you interject and say, I'd like to hear her finish her thought. Or when you hear somebody repeating someone else's great idea and getting all the credit, remind everyone who really originated it and say something like, that's a great idea, but we should thank Jean for bringing this up earlier. Or maybe someone is asking you questions, right? Instead of someone else who is the most qualified person or woman in the room, you can redirect that conversation with a simple, she is the expert on that topic, let's hear from Connie. And another example would be if someone asks the only woman of color to take minutes or track action items, offer to do it yourself. So by doing those things and amplifying the voices of your underrepresented colleagues, you can help ensure that all voices are heard. So over the past year, there has been a lot of discussion around allies, especially after George Floyd's murder, where African American co-workers needed the support of their allies to provide support and solidarity, right? And as we work towards becoming better allies, building allyship in our workplaces, it's important to sharpen our understanding of what allyship is and isn't. So we'll go to the next slide. First of all, allyship is defined by what you do and not by who you are or what you say you are. It's not passive. Your actions need to sync up with your commitment, with your words. Allyship is not an identity. It's not defined by what you say or what you say you are. That you don't go to a protest or you don't go to a group discussion and say, I'm an ally, right? It is really defined by what you actively do. And to use the spotlight or the opportunity that you have as an individual that is given to you to lift, engage, and support others who are not represented at all. And then second, allyship is an ongoing process. It's not a single action of support. It's practiced intentionally, consistently, because it's a mindset, it's a habit that drives your everyday choices and actions. It's a continuous process of understanding things from their perspective and learning about their lived experiences and then creating those opportunities to have those voices be heard. And then lastly, everyone can be an ally. It is not just limited to certain groups like whites or males, because privilege and power can be intersectional. For example, disability and age can cut across all groups. And then women can be allies to people of color too. An able-bodied person of color can be an ally to a white person who has a disability. An economically privileged person can be an ally to those who are not, and so on, right? So you don't have to be belonging to a particular group to be able to have the ability to become an ally to a person who needs it. So everyone has the ability to become an ally because allyship is really defined by what you do and not what or who you are. Next slide. So why is allyship important? Because allyship is critical, so very critical to the creation of safe spaces in the workplace and for creating that sense of belonging that we need in our work environment. So we cannot, as organizations and leaders, build a culture that is inclusive without allyship And that's the reason why we say allyship is the key to inclusion. Because inclusion is not going to be achieved on the backs of your ERGs and DI councils that consist of your Black, Indigenous, people of color who push for change. Inclusion requires in equal measure the work and effort of those who are represented, those who do have a voice, those who do have a say, pushing for the inclusion of those other voices. Why? Because inclusion benefits everyone. Some people don't understand that yet because they're looking at it as a zero-sum game. But that's not the case. We don't have to take from one to give to another because we don't just have one pie. We can have 5 pies with DE&I because the benefits of DE&I are so exponential. And it's our job as leaders and custodians of our organizations to help them understand that. Because DEI benefits everyone and it lifts all boats. We know that the metrics by which we measure the outcomes of successful D&I efforts, that it positively impacts all business metrics. And that's why we say it needs to be a business imperative and it should be a part of any company's overall business strategy. But we can't get there if we don't engage everyone. We need everyone to create that culture of inclusiveness. And that's why DEI is a shared responsibility and why allyship is so critical. So how do we help people understand that? And for that, we have Sonia to discuss strategies that we can take to build that kind of alignment. Sonia?
Thank you so much, Roselle, for starting by framing the conversation so well. And so you talked about the why and that it benefits everyone. But, there is still people that, as you said, they think of this as a zero-sum game. And so here's a little bit more information about why should people want to take the time and use their social capital, as you were saying earlier, in the workplace to be allies. Well, there are many personal reasons that may motivate them. A business really can't rely on that, right? So alignment is really critical. So to encourage allyship and motivate allies, you need to provide data and insights that link the end outcome that you want, so which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, with business drivers and strategic priorities that they care about. So some of these examples are listed here, and you can see to the right some stats. I mean, these are reports that are very well documented by industry leaders, which show significant outcomes, as you said, Roselle, about, it really benefits everyone and benefits the business as a whole. Here you can see that inclusive organizations are shown to be not just a few percentage points, but, by factors, make you more likely to, for example, retain millennials for over 5 years, 3 times more likely for inclusive organizations. Also more likely to be agile and innovative, 6 times more likely. And then finally, whatever your business outcomes are, to achieve better business outcomes, it's been reported that inclusive organizations are 8 times more likely to get better business outcomes. So now that we've talked a little bit about the concepts, let's go to the next slide. We are going to now get down to some specific actions. That's what I love about this series, is that it's not just concepts that you could frankly read on your own and find a lot of places, but we all want to know, well, what are some of the specific actions that we can take and what tools we can use to get there. So we'll start with sharing ideas and experiences. Here's some startling data to start the conversation on the right-hand side. Lean In and SurveyMonkey talked to over 7,000 US adults in 2018, found that more than 80% of white employees view themselves as allies to women of color. Yet, as you see below that, only 10% of Black women and 19% of Latinas say they have white colleagues who are strong allies in the workplace. Big discrepancy, right? So why it's so important to start the actions for allyship with sharing ideas and experiences is that we all can be educated about the needs of the people that you may be trying to be allies with. Okay, so it can start by simply offering an opportunity to be heard and then listening closely and without judgment. You know, people do surveys, listening sessions, targeted one-on-ones. These are all great and should be used more if you're already doing some of that. We also found that providing a safe environment to capture the voice of all employees on an ongoing basis, with an option to be anonymous, is really one of the best ways, because it allows for true learning, understanding, and developing empathy for the unfamiliar. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. We'll talk more about this and some specific tools and resources to do that. But it's really, as you said earlier, Roselle, it's not enough to just do this once in a while, right? And it's better to be, as we'll talk about a little bit later too, to do small actions than, you know, big actions that are, you know, every so often, but more on a continuous basis, do more micro actions. This causes trust to develop. You know, when you start sharing and really listening to the voice of the employees and getting more familiar with experiences that people have that you may not be familiar with, trust develops across different communities, which makes it easier to have authentic conversations. What you want to listen for in all of this is if you're hearing voices of those who are marginalized and that you hear from the least on a regular basis, right? Some people say, oh, we have great engagement, you know, but then it's like, who are they? You know, are you really hearing from the same people that you would hear on other channels or by other means? Are you really hearing from people that you heard from least on an ongoing basis? We also noticed the lasting effect on the quality of the engagement when you have this kind of an approach, which is more consistent with developing feelings of inclusion and belonging. So engagement is, you know, and sharing ideas is good, but if sharing the ideas is not really authentic, it's not on some level, you know, connecting with the personal experiences that people are having, then it won't have as much effect. So the quality of that conversation is also very important. Now, on the next slide, let's talk about building, you know, a culture of inclusion. A culture of inclusion, which you talked about, Roselle, is really only possible, as you said, when you engage everyone. That's what culture is, right? It's a set of broad behaviors that are exhibited by a lot of people. And that's becoming really harder, especially in a hybrid work environment. Why is this so important? Engagement is shown to have a significant impact on employee retention, as you can see in the graphic to the right. I really like this data. It was just provided in late, I think around November of 2020. It shows that turnover rates for employees who are moderately or highly engaged are far less, almost half or a third of the turnover rates for employees that are barely engaged or totally disengaged. Now, every organization cares about this, right? So, and this is where allyship really matters. It goes a long way for an ally to show their own vulnerability, admitting their own privilege, ignorance, or unconscious bias. This is such a strong influence. We have given it a name at our company, at our office. We call it the CEO effect. We started observing that when a CEO or a key leader who is an ally engages in authentic conversations, it has a 2 times to 10 times impact on the overall engagement of all employees. So that's really significant, right? Especially because engagement levels over the last 20 years that the reports have come out have really stayed around. They've only improved a few percentage points. They've gone from about 26, 27% to nowadays around 35, 36% overall. So the engagement overall is low. So getting this kind of an impact is significant. And then not only that, the engagement levels remain high. We've observed it in the environment that we provide on our platform where employees can engage, that this goes on for about a couple of weeks afterwards. And then they ultimately settle down the level of engagement at a higher level than before the ally engagement happened. So it's critical for long-term sustained engagement. On the next slide, let's start talking a little bit about taking that one step further beyond, sharing and experiences and engagement to actually taking small actions, what we call micro actions. As we said earlier, what differentiates allies is that they're active with their own actions versus passively supporting others' actions or just making supportive statements. Now, the point here is that these actions don't have to be big and challenging ones. I hear this all the time from CEOs of our customers or other key leaders that they're looking for that one big thing they can do, and that's sometimes hard, and sometimes it falls by the wayside just because there are other priorities. But in fact, it's been proven that simple and easy actions to promote a more diverse and inclusive workplace can have broader effects if taken consistently over a period of time. So that's why we call them micro actions. As the result said earlier, everyone can be an ally. This is because most micro actions are actually doable by anyone. I love the example of when, in a meeting, one of your colleagues who's from an underrepresented group brings up a good idea, no one picks it up, as Rosal was describing, and then someone else brings up the same idea. And it is, it's a really good ally action that anyone can take to remind everyone that the idea was originally presented by that person. Another example is if people are discussing a venue for a work event, and you know that it won't be convenient or comfortable for a few members of the team who have limitations or a disability that will make it hard for them to participate. It can also be the timing of the event, like for working mothers and others, may not be as convenient to just, meet after work. You can be an ally by drawing attention to these sorts of issues and suggesting alternatives that may work better for everyone. So hopefully, as we talked about sharing experiences and ideas, engaging and taking micro actions, these have given you a good solid framework for the types of actions that you can take as an ally. Now, we want to make it easier for you. So let's talk about, on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about tools and resources. These are tools and resources to make it easier and give you some specific ways to start right after this webinar, after you go and back to your office. So on the next slide, let's start with DEI objectives. Often we hear from allies that they want to help, but they just don't know where to start, right? I'm sure you hear this result from your customers. And that's why we like to start the conversation with setting DEI objectives. To define objectives, you need to start by identifying the key organizational gaps first. An effective way to do this is a maturity model assessment that we conduct at our office. It looks at the infrastructure readiness for DEI as defined by an organization's processes and policies, benefits, and so on in key areas like DEI strategy and commitment, talent diversity, workplace inclusivity, and engagement and communication. You can see these on the right-hand side. The assessment can produce scores in these areas and then an overall score that gives you a sense of where the organization is on a scale. We've defined a scale of aware to focus to progressive and then world-class. Up at the top here on the right-hand side, you can see a quote from one of our customers that, saying that they knew there were issues, but this kind of an assessment gives them, really the data specifically to know where to focus more. And this is really important because, as we said, allies, the really important thing about allies that differentiates them is their actions. And so it's important to know what kind of action to take if you're just in the phase of becoming aware versus actions that are appropriate for those that are progressive or world-class. I mean, clearly there are different kinds of actions. Other key information that you need here we have on this slide is voice of the employees. We use different tools. You can see ones, I'm sure that some of them you have, employee experience surveys, listening sessions, And to be an effective ally, it's also important to understand senior leadership's strategic priorities, because linking D&I objectives with those priorities will certainly create more urgency and make them more sustainable in the long run. We touched upon this a little bit earlier. And this is really important because a lot of times, what we find is everybody actually, almost everyone wants to do something towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sure that you have bosses, you have key leaders, and the organization that you're associated with. I don't think you can hardly find anyone who says it's not important or they don't want to do anything about it. But a lot of times these DEI objectives and actions are just not as high priority. They're priority, but not as high priority. And they're not treated the same, as the other business objectives in terms of urgency and commitment. So this defining them specifically, they don't have to be many. We always recommend a handful of DEI objectives that are directly linked with the business objectives and strategic priorities, and that's sufficient. And then making sure that they're very well defined and treated with the same urgency and commitment. On the next slide, you see a screenshot of our office platform that provides an easy way to broadly communicate these objectives, right? Because once you define them, you still have to let people know. A good test is go around any organization, ask them, what are your D&I objectives this year for the next 12 months, right? Or if you can't just know them off the top of your head, then do you know where to go access them, right? And this really provides that. It provides an easy way to broadly communicate the objectives and for everyone to see them and then to plan and track their own actions and link them with these objectives. You can see on the right-hand side of this, there's a list of actions, actually suggested actions, because sometimes people will say, yeah, I want to do something, but I just can't think of something right now, or I don't know if something is going to backfire. So you can, down the middle there, you can just click on one of those actions. There's actions with different levels of impact that are suggested there. There's many of them. You can keep refreshing them and then make them your own. You just click on them and they pop into the area there in the middle to be your own action. And then you can, of course, over time, track these, complete them, and link them with the DEI objectives so that everyone in the enterprise then can see what actions are being performed towards the DEI objectives. So Rosanna, I think you're going to share something more also in terms of specific tools.
Yes. So one of your key business priorities is hiring diverse talent, right? So we're going to talk about the 3 levers that you have when it comes to changing the demographic makeup of your workforce. Because you really only have 3. You either hire them in, you promote them in, or you transfer them to those positions, or you replace them for turnover, right? Those are your 3 key levers. And Sonia is going to talk later about developing and retaining them. But first, let's talk about hiring. And the key to hiring more diverse talent lies in 2 places. It's in the diversification of your talent pipeline, and the second one is in creating an inclusive, bias-free, and fair selection and hiring process. If you have those 2 elements, you will succeed. But you have to have those 2 elements work hand in hand. I don't think you can achieve your goal if you don't leverage both. So let's talk about diversification. Your recruiters may have been having difficulty finding diverse candidates because they've been sourcing from the same communities and networks. They need to identify new talent sources beyond those that they've used in the past, or new ones that they have probably been ignoring, such as individuals with disabilities, right? And oftentimes we hear, I'm sure Sonia, you hear this too, time and time again, it's too time consuming. We have so many requisitions, we don't have time. But it doesn't have to be, right? Because here on this slide, we show you the wide variety of demographic groups that are represented in CIRCA's outreach management system, which houses over 15,500 community-based organizations and state workforce agencies who provide employment and placement services to veterans, to individuals with disabilities, to minorities, to women, minority students, if you're doing campus recruiting, indigenous peoples, and LGBTQIA populations. So by using resources and tools that are already there, where they've already built up those relationships with those organizations, you can amplify your recruiters' reach, right? And make it easy for them to conduct outreach and develop candidate referral relationships with those organizations. And then in the next slide, as I mentioned earlier, the other area, if we can move on to the next slide, Katie, the other area you need to look at is your selection process. Because you may be bringing those applicants to your doorstep, but for some reason, they're not making it through your hiring process. Why? Because there may be certain biases in your selection process and in your criteria that are being applied that may be causing or preventing them from getting through. So it's important for you to evaluate your selection criteria and your minimum qualifications. Why is the criteria what they are? Why do you need a degree? Why a 3.2 GPA, for example? Why do you need 5 years of experience in project management, right? So you also need to take a look at your job descriptions. Are they unwittingly using gendered language that tends to dissuade female applicants or veterans from applying? And if we look at the next slide, you could see here a screenshot of our AI for candidate matching tool, where this helps you debias those job descriptions so that then it would appeal to a broader number of people. And it will also help you standardize your candidate matching to just focus solely on what those skills and expertise you need for the job you have on hand to the talent that applicants bring. So you need to be able to find ways to debias your hiring process. And you can use blind hiring tools in order for you to accomplish that, where you're just really focusing on the talent that is being brought on by the applicant, as well as the skill or expertise that you need for the job. And focus on that. And that's how you standardize your hiring process to make it more objective and eliminate the noise that is so frequently present in our selection process. So that is one way that you could achieve a more fair and equitable hiring process that is devoid of bias. And leveraging technologies such as Circa's AI for candidate matching is one of those ways that you can cast a wider net. Sonia is going to talk about, so we bring them in to your organization. Now the challenge is in the back door, right? You can't have a good or effective front door process if you don't have a back door plan, because you need to manage that back door. And for that, we'll have Sonia talk through that process with us.
Thanks, Roselle. That was such a great set of tools that you showed there. It's just so much technology is out there to help with this. And I know people get inundated, especially, as you said, it's a matter of time, right? People get inundated with lots of resumes. People tell me, oh, we get so many resumes, we have some simple, way, but there's really technology that can do a much better job of sifting through those for you and really making the job easier. And as you said, bringing them in is one thing, and obviously there's great sort of tools that Circa has, for example, that can help with that. But then how do you keep them? I always say, how do you keep them, and how do you keep them happy? This was my personal experience when I was trying to manage a large organization with diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And frankly, once we put our mind to it, we could hire people and do all the great things that you said, go to the right sources and do remove the bias and so on. But then keeping them was really becomes the next big challenge. Now, a big part of retention, as we talked about before, is creating engagement, right? We showed the great effect that that has on the turnover rates for the more engaged employees. So here's a case study to hopefully just make it more real for you, right? This is a real client, a medium-sized company that we have in the Midwest, and not unlike other companies in their industry and region, and really a lot of companies, they had significant challenges engaging their employees by any other means that they had tried. They had, even with their surveys, their CEO webcasts, suggestion boxes and other means. We launched our Office Culture app, which provides a safe environment for employees to engage in authentic conversations, share their experiences and ideas, as well as resources, best practices that they come across for improving their workplace culture. As we always recommend, the CEO was also personally involved and periodically engaged on the platform. The result was that the employee engagement was 4 times within the first month. And this isn't like a long time, but within the first month, they communicated very effectively, of course, with our guidance and support. But compared to any other means that they had tried before, they got 4 times engagement. They also saw a sharp increase in engagement whenever the CEO posted, or even just did a reaction or responded to another post. This is what we referred to earlier as the CEO effect. They had not anticipated this last point here, but they also started to get unsolicited positive feedback from their new hires about their onboarding experience, because they included this in onboarding. They told people about it, and so employees were able to do that. Now, on the next slide, you can see a screenshot from the Culture app. If we can go to the next one, please. You can see there down the middle an example of a post. It's very simple to use, like most social media, but it's different in that at the top you can see colorful boxes that guide the user to the types of posts that they're encouraged to make, such as posts about their workplace culture, micro actions. It's really important to do this, however you go about this, to create a safe environment. It's important to guide people, to let them know, what kind of conversations, that this is meant for. But having the intentionality to give them such an environment is really very powerful. They, in this case, for example, they can see a range of options for users to react to a post. These are specifically designed to nudge towards inclusive behaviors. And then on the right-hand side, users get insights about people in the spotlight who are most engaged overall, as well as their own activities, who's most engaged with their content. And then if you click on the trending post there on the top, you go to the next screen. If you would show that, yeah, here. So you can see that there's an option to see the trending posts that are, based on the highest number of reactions or responses that month, what people said. So these are, again, just ways to give people what you want to do in this kind of an environment. Again, however you go about it, is to make sure that there is some feedback, right? That people kind of know. You can't just throw it out there and let people do whatever, right? You may sometimes get unexpected outcomes. So you want to be thoughtful about it. You want to communicate very effectively about it. And again, the most important thing is ultimately, the content that's there and whether people will keep engaging and coming back. We've had, in one instance, we had, an organization that was actually not following and not really talking about even. It wasn't an open thing in their culture to talk about sexual orientation. And they told us this up front. So, we launched and we said, well, that's fine. You don't, then just, that's your culture. And this is just a communication tool. But sure enough, there was an anonymous post about someone asking about benefits, for example, for same-sex couples. It turns out that this was a great way for the culture to really evolve to another level. The leadership decided to address that and address it appropriately, which is, they did have, of course, benefits that were for married couples. And ever since 2015, it applied to both same-sex and heterosexual couples. But that for unmarried couples, they just didn't offer benefits. And that was, again, the same, regardless of sexual orientation. That really created such a positive vibe. Both the person who had asked the question anonymously came out and actually shared, who they are and thanked the organization. And then it engendered a lot of other feedback and positive reactions to that post, and especially to the organization's response to that post. So some of these things, whether we like it or not, they exist. They're under the surface. And so this is all about respectfully and of course within the cultural norms that the organization has, start to surface and start to get familiar with some of these concepts. And it goes a long way to do that with this kind of an approach. Another big benefit on the next slide, if we can go there, that can come from this is inclusive onboarding. This kind of an environment we just showed, it encourages connecting with others in a safe environment from day one that a new hire arrives. Another way to make this onboarding more inclusive is to also include the DEI objectives and actions and share those and talk about them in the onboarding process. This is where allies, again, can help. They can help by amplifying the importance of DEI objectives and actions that are planned around it. And data shows, the reason this is so important is that data shows most employees will make up their minds about their new employer within the first 90 to 180 days. That's why incorporating DEI in the onboarding from the start is so important. New hires are also the best ambassadors for an organization because they tend to talk more about their new job with their friends and colleagues in their network than at any other time, right? So if they see this, they see there's an environment where they can engage, they see that there's actions actually planned around DEI, then it gives them just a different perspective altogether for kind of like branding that we talk about, right? Branding with your employees and especially the new ones. It's an entirely different approach to it that has really significant results for those organizations that try this. Last but not least, allies can seek feedback from the new hires when there's an open environment like this, more easily, right, about their experience. This is not only very helpful for an inclusive onboarding experience by the new hires to be, approached or asked by their leaders or an ally how they're doing. It's a simple question like, how are you doing on an environment like this? And of course, you may do it other ways. You may just run into them these days to the extent that people are in the office. But whatever you find, it's very important during that onboarding to take the time to ask new hires how they're doing. Because, they have fresh eyes, and it's really not only makes them feel good, but it's an important source of information for the organization about how the workplace culture and behaviors show up for someone that just got there and what areas of improvement they might have. So with that, Rosa, I think you were going to share some also on this as we go forward on the hiring.
Yes. So it's important for when we talk about objectives, measuring how far you're going and your progress in achieving those objectives. So let's talk about metrics and analytics now. When it comes to your hiring strategies, first of all, you need to make sure you know what your starting point was and where you want to land, right? And when you're setting goals, what do you base those goals on? Not just in terms of where your workforce demographics are right now, but you need to compare that to what's available in your geographic recruitment area. So that's going to help you develop your goals. And for example, if there are 23.6 African Americans in your recruitment area and you're at 9.7, then that becomes your basis for setting a goal of, say, 15% in year one, and then maybe in year two, we'll be at 21, 22%, right? So getting closer to that goal. So you don't just develop those goals arbitrarily. And then once you have that, to measure progress in between, beyond just tracking what are your total applicants and hires, measure how many are actually getting through each stage in the process. And this is where I see many employers fail. They're just looking at the end result and the beginning, but they're not really evaluating the throughput in their selection process, right? You need to take a look at, are there certain stages where diverse applicants are falling out of the process in disproportionate numbers compared to non-minority candidates? And why? And that causes you to then critically evaluate what is the selection criteria that was being applied that caused their rejection, right? And what is that selection criteria? Why is it in place? How is that job related? Is it objective? Is it measurable? Can you defend that, right? And is it consistently being applied to all candidates? So that's where you could see, is there adverse impact? Is there bias that's playing into your process that you can now, if you get insight into that early on in the process, you can address and find ways whereby you could open up your hiring process to make it more inclusive. So for example, on this slide, we're showing analytics that track how many minority and female candidates are moving on to the interview stage and are being hired. And here we're comparing women to men, but we're also tracking minority candidates and how they're progressing. So let's say out of the 827 applicants, you can see that 41% of them are women, 43% of them are people of color, and that's great, right? That's a testament to the results of your outreach efforts, as we show here on the right-hand section of the slide. So this is an example of the report card that Circa provides to its diversity recruiting customers, showing the different ways that we help employers reach targeted populations. So, but if you're succeeding at bringing them to your door, why are you still not achieving your diversity hiring goal? So the answer to that, as I've mentioned earlier, lies in your selection criteria. So the metrics that will help you evaluate your hiring process and your selection process are important. And having a snapshot in time at the beginning and comparing that 1 year or even 6 months later, sooner rather than later, you'll be able to see progress before it translates into hires. You'll be able to see problems also before it's too late. So in the next slide, we'll talk about analytics that you can use for measuring development and retention. And for that, I'll hand this back to Sonia.
Thanks, Roselle. So this case study highlights the importance of measuring what matters, as Roselle said, and the power of turning data into insights, especially for an ally that wants to be more effective. So here our client is a manufacturing company that has top leadership focus on DEI. When we started with them, most of their D&I efforts were focused on entry-level hiring from diverse sources like historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs, which is great. But they had retention issues. So as soon as we uploaded their employee data, the analytics surfaced actually a significant gap, not at the entry level, but between the overall percentage of females, which was about 35%, and females in management, which was only at about 16%. This actually happened to be around their annual performance review time. And we were also able to take it one step further to help them focus on the root causes by looking at and assessing metrics that showed that ultimately showed that women were actually highly represented in their highest performance rankings. About 40% of their exceeds expectations were actually female. But then when you looked at the promotions, again there, for whatever reason, it just showed that they were not adequately represented there. They were represented at about 15% of promotions into those levels of the management that we're looking at were women. I mean, clearly this could be done for any other diversity category, right? In this case, it happened to be women, but it can be around the diversity categories of race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, veteran status, and so on. So what followed is very interesting. Without setting any requirements around diversity or quotas or anything, because I know, and frankly, it's true. Quotas depends on the culture of the organization. They can work sometimes, but sometimes they can backfire. There's no really easy answer to whether that works or not. But this awareness, right, this insight, it naturally led to an increase of 20% in the percentage of female managers only within about 3 months. because it happened to be around their performance management period. So, you know, most of these gaps and things that exist, again, we talk about this unconscious bias, and I know there's lots of training, everybody's talking about unconscious bias, but really where it matters and why it matters is when it enters in our decision making without us being aware of it, right? I mean, that organization clearly was not, you know, systematically trying to not promote women, right? It just so happened. And because there were so few at those levels, you know, it kind of is, you know, self-perpetuating, right? Unless you actually correct for it very consciously, they continue to, you know, people continue to just be more comfortable and pick people that more look like themselves. And so that, you know, kind of continued this trend. But once they became aware that actually the overall pool was, you know, a respectable 35% women in highest, you know, rankings that they had themselves given, women were very highly represented, but somehow in promotions, they were not showing up. That really helped them with their awareness and to make different decisions in that performance evaluation cycle. An additional benefit that you see here was, again, somewhat unintended, but very welcome, was that they saw an increase of 30% in diverse talent retention by the end of that year. Again, there's data showing that when employees see evidence of opportunity and career advancement, that retention significantly increases. You know, you can tell people they have opportunity, but unless they see it, that it's actually happening to people that they can identify with, you know, it's hard to really believe and internalize that. On the next slide, you can see a screenshot of our Office Analytics module, you know, that they were using. It's not their data, obviously, but it's similar data. And we have up to about 50 predefined key performance indicators or KPIs for DEI. The three curves you see here, just to make it more real for you, right? They're like representative of how you would look at number of, you know, like percentage of females overall versus in supervisory roles and then in managerial roles. And you can see that top curve, you know, they had worked hard on increasing over some period of time to get to, for example, you know, a higher percentage of females overall. But then as you went to that purple line, it's lower. That's the representation of women in first line supervisory roles. And then when you get to the orange curve, which is the lowest one, that's the representation of women in the managerial roles. So this is exactly the kind of data that they looked at. And now this is meant as a management tool that provides the ability to set goals and also to be very collaborative by sharing comments, for example, about specific gaps. I don't know if you see at the very bottom, it's hard to see it maybe here, but there is a place to make comments. You can see other people's comments right there to the left of the little elephant sign there. The elephant actually has a function too, but we won't go into that right here. But anyway, you can be collaborative, you can react to this, people can talk about the gaps, the actions that they like to be taken, and so on. So that's how one of the ways in which you can have a way to really understand what's going on and really start to talk about what to do about it.
Thank you, Sonia. We can move on to the next slide. So we're at the conclusion of our session, and I hope that Sonia and I made the case very clear in terms of allyship and its importance in building inclusive workplace cultures. And as the name suggests, inclusion implies an action. The feeling of being included or belonging, for that matter, you can't achieve that really without positive actions and the support of others who can help us create those safe spaces. And as Sonia emphasized, we need to bring clarity to that vision and show others how that aligns to benefit our business priorities and impact hiring, engagement, and retention outcomes for our organization, and how that can benefit everyone. So it's not just the right thing to do, but it makes business sense to do it. And also, hopefully from here, you also learn that allies can be anybody, because we usually think of white males when we first think of allies, right? That's not the case. I mean, everybody has the ability to be one, and you don't even have to be in a leadership position to be one. You can practice allyship in your everyday choices and actions. And hopefully, when we do it, you know, you can start by, you know, just listening, as Sonia mentioned, listening to their perspectives, because that is what will encourage the sharing and the exchange, which will then foster empathy, trust, and it's that trust, just like with any human relationship, that really breeds the feelings of inclusion and the belonging that we all seek. So before we hand this off to Katie for some final reminders, Sonia, do you have any parting thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience?
Thank you. Thank you again for inviting me here. It's been a pleasure. And the only parting thought I would leave, I think, is don't think too big. This is one case where I would say don't think too big. Think of small things. What can you do? And whoever you are in whatever level of the organization, just think within your own sphere of influence. We all have a sphere of influence. And if you think about it, you can come up with small things you can do every day. It starts there, and then it can get you know, bigger over time. But I'm certain that you can think of them, and you know, it will just be. It will also make you feel so good about it as well.
Very well said. Okay, back to you, Katie. Do we? I think we have some final reminders, and then we can also field any questions that may have come up.
Yes, just as a note, we have the questions in the, oh, didn't click. There we go. We have some questions that we want to answer before we part ways. So if you want, in the right-hand side, we do have the questions box. We do have one for Sonia already. They said, I look forward to learning more about the analytical tool. Does it interface with many job application platforms, or does it include job applications and postings? Okay, this might be for AI candidate matching as I'm reading it.
Roselle, would you like to take that, or?
Yeah, so with AI candidate matching, that's integrated into Circa's platform. So it's a single sign-on interface. So if you're using Circa, that can be something that can be added on to what your existing subscription, and you'll be able to leverage AI candidate matching for any job that you have on the Circa platform. You can use it for all of your jobs. You can use it for certain jobs, and it will open up the ability for you to do blind screening tools, debias your job descriptions, at the same time enable the ability for the tool for your recruiters to not see the names, not see the gender. It will strip the information that typically are visible to your recruiters in terms of the names of candidates on their resumes, and you'll be able to accomplish a little bit more, you know, a more standardized job matching between your job and candidates that we are able to surface. So not only is it able to do that standardized job matching, it will also give you access to a more diverse talent pool, and then rank those candidates for you in terms of who is a 90+% match, and then you can focus your attention on those candidates.
Yeah, I'll just add, if I may, that, you know, most of the technology, by the way, does, you know, our platform does too, and Circa, as Rosella mentioned, you know, like, for example, the interface with the applicant tracking system as well that you have, you know, to provide, you know, overall trends. So it's really, the technology is very flexible in most cases, no matter who you're talking to, really. So you should just ask the question and not be too concerned about that, because usually these things do interface with each other from a technology perspective.
Perfect, thank you. We have time for one more question. So the next question we have is, what best practices do you recommend for mitigating bias in the hiring process beyond panels or bias training?
I can add, if you like, you know, I think the most important thing is it starts at the very beginning, is what Roselle was saying earlier, is to set the, set some hiring goals, first of all, to just give people objectives around, that could be one of your D&I objectives, but also then question the way that the job descriptions are made, both in the specific requirements, as Roselle talked about a little bit earlier, but also in the language. Sometimes the language will attract more diverse people versus not, whether it's gender or racial or whatever that you're looking for. But setting those goals and then making sure that the process starts in the right direction with a job posting that is truly inclusive and requirements that are truly appropriate and not overboard and not unnecessarily excluding some people. I think is the most important. Roselle, I defer to you also.
I would. I mean, of course, unconscious bias training is helpful, but I would actually go beyond that and take a look at your selection process. You have an opportunity to just take a look at every stage in your hiring process and identify. Most applicant tracking systems would support disposition codes. So limit the amount, limit the reasons. Review and limit the reasons that your recruiters or hiring managers can reject candidates, and make sure those reasons are objective, quantifiable, measurable, job related, and defensible. Because if you limit those rejection reasons, and if they're rejecting somebody for any other reason beyond what you provide, then they're going to have to stop, pause, and ask themselves, why is this not here, right? And they're going to have to justify that and support that. So find a way to really tighten up your selection process, and then train everybody involved in TA, including your hiring managers, on that process. And most of all, limit those rejection reasons and make sure that they're objective, because that is what will give you the opportunity to really build a process that is objective, consistent, and fair. And then train them while you're doing this, right? They need to understand the reasons for you making those types of decisions, and it is inclusion, and everybody has a stake when it comes to inclusion.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. We are out of time, and I do want to be conscious of everyone's time today. So I want to thank you, Sonia and Roselle, for joining us. We're really excited. Before everyone heads off, we do just have a quick poll to see if anyone is interested in learning more about Circa and the services that we have to offer. We have OFCC compliance and diversity outreach to help not only with your diversity outreach, but also compliance audit support. We also have diversity recruiting, and as noted earlier in the symposium, Circa has acquired diversity jobs. So we have the opportunity for you to reach more diverse candidates. And then we do want to note that we are very excited that we have our upcoming D&I as a service offering that we'll be doing with our office. So our office has pioneered diversity and inclusion as a service, and it's the only affordable end-to-end solution for small and medium businesses who want a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace. Their simple formula that includes a proven process platform and professional expertise is a great fit for organizations across diverse industries and has been featured by industry leaders such as Mercer and Deloitte. So we can definitely provide you with more information as we look to launch that in the coming months. But again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And as a note, we do have some upcoming webinars that if you would like to check out, we do have a lot coming up in the future. And again, Sonia and Roselle, we really appreciate your time today and your insights. It was a really great presentation.
It's our pleasure, Katie. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Roselle and Katie. Thank you, everyone, for giving us your attention. Bye-bye.